Have you ever noticed how some women who once devoted their entire lives to their families grow distant or resentful toward their husbands in old age? What many people call hatred is often the result of decades of emotional build-up, finally surfacing when life slows down. Years of emotional neglect can quietly reshape a relationship, especially in long marriages where needs were repeatedly ignored rather than openly addressed. Many older women spent decades giving care, patience, and emotional support to their husbands, children, and families while receiving very little in return in their younger years. They often stayed silent, believing sacrifice was part of love or responsibility. They told themselves things would improve with time, or that their feelings were less important than keeping the family stable. Over the years, however, unmet emotional needs do not disappear. They accumulate. Small moments of being dismissed, not listened to, or taken for granted slowly build into a deep sense of loneliness. Even within marriage, a woman may have shared a house, a bed, and a life with her husband, yet still felt emotionally alone. Compliments faded, affection became routine or vanished, and meaningful conversations were replaced by silence or indifference. In old age, life naturally slows down, children leave, work ends, and distractions reduce. This quiet phase forces reflection. Many older women finally have the mental space to look back and realize how often they felt unseen or emotionally unsupported. What once felt tolerable now feels painful. The patience they relied on for years begins to wear thin. This emotional awakening is often mistaken for bitterness or hatred. In reality, it is the voice of long-suppressed feelings finally emerging. The anger is not sudden, it is delayed. It represents grief for the emotional connection they hoped for but never fully received. At this stage of life, older women often desire understanding, validation, and simple emotional presence more than ever. When those needs continue to go unmet, frustration may turn into resentment. What looks like rejection of a husband is often a reaction to decades of emotional neglect that were never acknowledged, healed, or spoken aloud. 2. Loss of identity and purpose. Loss of identity and purpose is a deeply emotional experience that many older women face, and it can quietly affect how they feel toward their husbands in later life. For decades, many women defined themselves through roles such as wife, mother, caregiver, and homemaker. Their days were filled with responsibility, routine, and being needed. While these roles were meaningful, they often left little room for personal dreams, self-expression, or individual growth. As old age arrives, many of these roles begin to fade. Children grow independent, households become quieter, and daily responsibilities reduce. Suddenly, the identity that once gave structure and meaning to life no longer feels relevant. This transition can create an unsettling emptiness. A woman may begin to question who she is beyond what she provided for others. This internal struggle can be painful and confusing if a husband continues to see her only through her old roles, expecting care, routine, or emotional support without acknowledging her inner world. The sense of invisibility grows stronger. Feeling unseen or unappreciated by the person closest to you can be deeply hurtful. Over time, this emotional disconnect may turn into irritation or resentment. Old age also brings reflection. Many women look back and realize how much of themselves they put aside for marriage and family. Dreams delayed, talents unused, and personal desires ignored can surface as regret. When these feelings are not understood or respected by their partner, frustration intensifies. This loss of purpose is often misunderstood as negativity or anger toward a husband. In reality, it is an emotional response to feeling forgotten and undervalued. What many older women truly seek is not conflict, but recognition, respect, and reassurance that they still matter as individuals. When identity is acknowledged and Purpose is rediscovered, emotional distance can soften, and understanding has a chance to return. 3. Carrying the emotional load alone. Carrying the emotional load alone is a quiet but heavy burden that any women bear throughout long marriages, and its impact often becomes most visible in old age. For years, many women take responsibility for the emotional health of the relationship without even realizing it. They remember important dates, smooth over conflicts, sense emotional shifts, support everyone during difficult times, and keep the family emotionally connected. This invisible labor is rarely acknowledged because it happens silently, behind the scenes. In earlier years, women often accept this role out of love, duty, or social expectation. They tell themselves it's normal to be the emotional glue of the family. However, constantly giving emotional support without receiving the same care slowly drains emotional energy. Over time, this imbalance creates exhaustion, even if the marriage outwardly appears stable. As women grow older, their tolerance for emotional imbalance often decreases. With fewer distractions like raising children or managing busy households, they finally have space to reflect. Many realize they were the ones always listening, always adjusting, and always understanding, while their own feelings were minimized or overlooked. This realization can be painful. It brings a sense of unfairness and emotional loneliness. When a husband continues to rely on his wife for emotional stability without offering empathy, appreciation, or emotional presence in return, frustration deepens. Simple things, being asked how she feels, being listened to without interruption, or receiving reassurance, may still be missing even after decades together. This absence can feel especially hurtful later in life, when emotional connection matters more than ever. What may look like anger or hostility is often emotional burnout. It is not hatred, but the result of years of carrying more than one person should. Many older women do not want conflict, they want relief, they want partnership, instead of responsibility. When the emotional load is finally acknowledged and shared, resentment can ease, and understanding has a chance to replace the long-held exhaustion. For fear, vulnerability, and aging anxiety. Vulnerability and aging anxiety are powerful emotional forces that quietly shape relationships in later life, especially for older women. As the body changes with age, health concerns become more frequent and unavoidable. There may be chronic pain, reduced mobility, memory worries, or fear of serious illness. Along with physical changes comes the unsettling realization that independence may not last forever. For many women, this stage brings a deep sense of vulnerability they may never have felt before. Emotionally, aging can trigger anxiety about the future. Questions arise silently. Who will take care of me if I become weak? Will I still be loved if I am no longer strong, useful, or attractive? These fears are rarely spoken out loud. Instead, women look to their closest partner, their husband, for reassurance, patience, and emotional safety. When that reassurance is missing, fear often turns into frustration. If a husband responds to aging struggles with impatience, criticism, jokes, or emotional distance, it can feel like rejection at the most sensitive time of life. Even small dismissive comments can cut deeply when a woman is already feeling fragile. What she may need most is kindness, understanding, and a sense that she is not facing aging alone. Old age also brings a loss of control. A woman who once managed everything may now need help herself, which can be frightening and humbling. If her husband fails to offer emotional support during this transition, anxiety can harden into resentment. The fear of being dependent without being cherished is deeply painful. What may appear as anger or hostility is often a protective response. It is fear wearing the mask of irritation. Many older women are not pushing their husbands away, they are reacting to feeling unsafe, unsupported, and emotionally exposed. When fear is met with compassion instead of distance, tension can soften. And emotional closeness can return even in the later chapters of life. 5. Lifelong poor communication. Lifelong poor communication is one of the most damaging patterns in long marriages, and its effects often surface most strongly in old age. Many couples spend years avoiding difficult conversations. Early on, disagreements are brushed aside to keep peace, raise children, or manage responsibilities. Feelings are swallowed. Needs are minimized, and problems are postponed with the belief that time will somehow fix everything. Unfortunately, silence does not heal, it stores tension. Over decades, this lack of open communication creates emotional distance. When a woman repeatedly feels unheard, interrupted, or dismissed, she may stop expressing herself altogether. She learns that speaking up leads to arguments, indifference, or criticism. So she chooses quiet instead. On the surface, the marriage may look calm, but underneath, unresolved emotions quietly pile up. In old age, life slows down, work ends, children leave, and distractions fade. With fewer external responsibilities, couples are left facing each other, and the silence becomes louder. Issues that were ignored for years resurface because there is no longer anything to distract from them for many older women. This is when the emotional weight of never being truly heard becomes impossible to ignore. Poor communication also means emotions were never validated. Apologies were rare, misunderstandings were never clarified, and emotional needs went unmet over time. This creates a sense of emotional loneliness even within marriage. A woman may feel she lived alongside her husband rather than with him. What appears as irritation, criticism, or anger in old age is often the delayed response to years of emotional suppression. The frustration is not sudden, it is accumulated. It reflects the pain of conversations that never happened and feelings that were never acknowledged. Older women often do not want to argue, they want to finally be understood. When communication has been absent for a lifetime, resentment can replace patience. Healing, even late in life, begins when listening replaces defensiveness and when emotions are finally allowed to be spoken without fear. 6. Grief over an unlived life. Grief over an unlived life is one of the most silent and painful emotions many older women carry, and it often surfaces in later years when there is finally time to reflect. Throughout their lives, many women made sacrifices for marriage, children, and family stability. Dreams were postponed, ambitions were set aside, and personal desires were often labeled as selfish or unrealistic. At the time, these choices felt necessary, even honorable, and were rarely questioned. As old age arrives, the future feels shorter, and reflection becomes unavoidable. Many women begin to look back and ask themselves who they might have been if circumstances were different, careers they never pursued, passions they never explored, love or emotional intimacy they hoped for but never fully experienced can all resurface as quiet sorrow. This realization can be deeply painful, not because life was meaningless, but because parts of themselves were never allowed to fully exist. This grief is not always directed inward. Often, it becomes associated with the closest person in their life, their husband, not necessarily because he caused every sacrifice, but because he represents the life that was lived instead of the one imagined. Unspoken resentment can grow if a woman feels her sacrifices were expected, unacknowledged, or taken for granted. The pain is intensified if she believes her husband had more freedom, recognition, or fulfillment during those same years. As opportunities feel limited with age, regret can sharpen. There is a sense that time has run out to become who they once hoped to be. This grief may express itself as irritation, sadness, withdrawal, or anger. What looks like bitterness is often mourning lost chances, unused potential, and emotional needs that were never met. At its core, This is not hatred toward a husband, but sorrow for a self that never fully lived. Many older women long not for the past to change, but for their sacrifices to be seen and honored. When this grief is met with understanding rather than judgment, it can soften into acceptance, peace, and even renewed emotional connection in the later stages of life.